This week on the Nittany Dispatch, we discuss Penn State's win over Wisconsin and its upcoming matchup against Ohio State in Beaver Stadium. This week on the Nittany Dispatch. Hello and welcome to the Nittany Dispatch. I am John Sauber, Penn State beat writer of the Center Daily Times. She is Audrey Snyder of The Athletic. And we are back for the first time since last week. That is my fault on that end. Had some technical difficulties that was making it tough to record out in Wisconsin. But we are now back, and we'll be back for the foreseeable future until my AirPods and microphone decide to mess us up again.
You know, John, I don't recognize you when you're not echoing in my ear nonstop. Yeah, we were a bit of a hot mess after that game, just in terms of you had an early morning flight, your microphone wasn't working. We tried Sunday night. I ended up an extra night in Milwaukee. John made it back to State College. My bag made it back to State College. I did not. And in the bag was the cord for my microphone. So we were just a disaster last week when it came to recording this show. But
yeah,
we're back now.
I can't say I recommend doing the finish working at 2:30 Central Time and setting an alarm for 4:15 Central Time to catch a flight. Probably not the best thing I've ever planned out my entire life. But
I tried to tell you it was a bad idea, but you didn't listen to me, John. And
listen,
but I still didn't get back to State College till Monday night. So
look at the hat. We were got to watch the Eagles beat the Bengals on Sunday, which is what I really care
about.
And
I got to watch the Packers win out there, so it was fine.
Yeah, there it is. Everything works out as intended. We will touch on the Wisconsin game to start this off, though, because we didn't have a post-game episode. Penn State winning 28-13 over the Wisconsin Badgers, and what I thought was a really impressive win on both sides of the ball. I think I tweeted out early maybe it was the first quarter, sometime in the first half. Now that game was 5 days ago, it feels like a century ago. But that I thought Penn State was dominating on both sides of the ball. It was just kind of a matter of the dam breaking when it would happen. And eventually it did. But most notably, it did with Beau Pribula in at quarterback after Drew Allar goes out with an injury at the end of the first half, comes back with a knee brace on at a halftime, ends up not going in the game. He's not the only player that got hurt. Dennis-Sutton appeared to suffer an injury and tried to go in the second half and came out after one play and was pretty frustrated, it looked like, on the sideline. Anthony Donkoh, who has been dealing with an injury. James Franklin talked about that this week. We'll get into all of those real quick, but I think we have to start with Allar, right? And what unfolded offensively in the Wisconsin game and kind of what it portends moving forward for Penn State.
Yes, things were bleak at halftime at Camp Randall for Penn State fans. And they were, I heard a lot of, oh my gosh, this is how the season ends, right? This is it. There was widespread panic. Then Beau Pribula comes out and looks the best that he has ever looked as a Penn State quarterback. I mean, yes, we know about the mobility and what he can do, but the fact that he was fitting that football into tight windows to me was like okay, this is different, right? The fact that he led 2 touchdown drives in the fourth quarter to put this game away, it was massive. And talking to players afterward about Beau, it was a matter of, hey, we've believed in this guy all along. We still have confidence in him. Drew Allar, as you mentioned, John, was on the sideline, standing there, was very engaged. James Franklin said that Drew did not have enough mobility to run the offense with, the level that they had hoped, which, when we were at practice Wednesday evening, Drew Allar was out there on the field, jogging around, throwing passes. He's still a game time decision for Saturday against Ohio State. But if, for whatever reason, right, and I truly believe, this is a game time decision. I'm not questioning the semantics of this. But I think if it gets to a point where maybe Drew Allar, right, takes a hit or something that he's slowed, Penn State should not be hesitant to use Beau Pribula, because what he showed last week was that this is not the same guy that we saw last year.
No, it's not. I do think there are some deficiencies there that still force the offense to change. And I think Andy Kotelnicki deserves a lot of credit as the play caller and the play designer and the game plan and all of that offensively, that for how he handled Drew Allar not being in the game. James Franklin said he was reminding Kotelnicki, hey, kind of different quarterback in there, kind of got to play it differently. Pribula can't stretch the field as well as Allar, and I think that matters, and that matters vertically. You usually think of it as downfield passing, but also horizontally, right? Like, you can't make the far hash mark to far sideline throws. You can't design some of the stuff that you would have Allar do otherwise. But like you said, we saw Allar out there. James said after practice that if Drew kind of couldn't go in practice, they would make sure Ethan Grunkemeyer was ready to go too. They would be splitting reps in that way. Ethan Grunkemeyer wasn't getting reps in that way. He was wearing Will Howard's number 18 as part of the scout team, which I think is a very positive sign for Allar. I'm trying to be careful how I phrase this. I listen, it's a positive if you're a Penn State fan. My expectation would be that we see Allar out there on Saturday against Ohio State. I'm not like this isn't stunning or anything like that, but it seems like that will be the plan. I wouldn't be surprised if there was more Beau Pribula. I think some of that is listen, this is a massive game. They're going to work in more of the stuff they've been working on, right? Some of the abnormal stuff that Kotelnicki calls, but also I think Pribula's play on Saturday warrants more conclusion, right? Like it warrants him being on the field more and getting more touches and involving him in the offense. I do think, like you said, though, he looked like a different quarterback. I don't know that is necessarily from the sense of he is suddenly like this elite pocket passer or anything. He looked like an evolved version of what we thought he was, which is really important because he is I think I had long thought he was a quality backup quarterback who they could sprinkle in there. Now I think, like you said, if something were to happen to Allar, they would be fine, right? Like it's still not the same thing, the same team, right? The ceiling is not as high, but I think they would be fine to be able to manage the situation in a way that would allow them to maybe not have the same upside, but reach the same baseline as an offense that we've gotten used to seeing with Allar at quarterback.
And I think too, there is a piece of this or a side of this that because I've heard this a lot this week too, of I don't think it's necessarily that loud, but there's a little bit of it of Beau Pribula should be the guy. And I'm like, did we just forget how good Drew Allar looked in that first quarter? Like, that? I mean, he had one incompletion in the first quarter, and it was the drop by Julian Fleming. Like, I think, I don't know. I'm not sure what kind of the disconnect or the recency bias, or maybe there's just general bias there of like, he's a PA guy, and like there's maybe an emotional connection from some folks with him.
I think
don't
part
know,
of it too
I saw some of that.
Is fans have seen that style of quarterback, the guy that he gets compared to, Trace McSorley. They've seen that was the idealized version of what a James Franklin-led team looks like, right? Like this was the best Penn State team was led by a mobile quarterback that looked like had the same mannerisms of Beau Pribula. And I think there's some of that, but I think you bring up something really important. And
really
probably has been.
I'm bringing value to the show, John. Is this what you're telling me?
I think this has been underdiscussed.
What have I brought?
Drew Allar looked like a different quarterback Saturday in Camp Randall when he was out there. I thought he was phenomenal. I thought he was making every throw in the book. The drop by Fleming, like you said, it was the only ball that hit the turf when he was passing. He looks like a quarterback good enough to not be a part of an Ohio State win, but to lead a team to an Ohio State win. And I think that's really important too, because listen, the wide receiver group wasn't it hasn't been like the butt of jokes or anything like that this season, but I also think it maybe hasn't taken the same step forward that it has been painted at, like same massive step forward, to be clear. I think it's obviously better than last year and significantly enough so that this offense is better for it. But I do think it's still missing key aspects that you want to see out of a wide receiver core. And I think having a quarterback that can kind of make up for that with the throws he makes is important too. And I think Allar looks like a quarterback who elevates the players around him. And that is a step that is important in every, discussion for a potential first round pick at quarterback. But to me, he is slowly but surely solidifying himself as that level of talent, that level of passer.
Yeah, and I think that's the piece of this. And you and we had this conversation at some point in the last 2 weeks. I honestly don't even remember if we had it on here. I don't think we did. But I know I wrote a little bit about it on The Athletic too, of so much of Penn State has been geared for this year, right? This moment. And who is your quarterback next year? You just opened the door about Drew Allar and how he's kind of looking the part. So I'm going to step right through it and say, should he move on after this year to the NFL? What we saw from Beau Pribula on Saturday at Camp Randall, that's your guy next year, right? Like that is what I took out of that. Now, John, there still could be a conversation to be had at some point of if that's the case. I wasn't so sure that was the case. I felt differently about it Saturday moving forward, that they were in a better spot there than I thought. maybe they don't need to address that position in the transfer portal if things play out. But I just jumped 20 steps ahead,
Yes.
and I can see that you're seething with rage,
No.
ready to jump in the port now. Okay.
I disagree, but only with the part that it's Pribula, like you're comfortable with. I think their quarterback is on that roster next year, and I think it's probably Ethan Grunkemeyer.
Okay.
We can get in that discussion.
We'll have lots of time to get to that. Yeah.
Comes. Yeah, but I do think that they are either way. Like Pribula is a good quarterback, and
they're in a good spot.
If he were to win a competition, I think that is a perfectly reasonable outcome of a good team that could make the playoff again. But that is a discussion for another day. We will go back to Wisconsin for the time being. This is I don't know. I think defensively we've covered the offense. I think the main stuff there is Allar and Pribula, right, and everything there. And
Donkoh was at practice Wednesday.
Yeah, Donkoh was at practice, but we didn't necessarily see him participating in everything. I think, and James said on Monday when I asked about Donkoh and how he's kind of working through this, he said players have to learn how to play through stuff and what they can play through, not how to play through stuff, what they can play through, and he's going through that process. My assumption is that we are going to see, as James said, both Donkoh and Rucci. He said it was too early to tell for sure on Monday, but that was kind of the plan. I would guess that we see both again. Donkoh goes as much as he can. If he's not able to, or if he's not able to play at the highest level, then we see Rucci. But I do think that they're in a good spot either way along the offensive line. Defensively, we talk about Dennis-Sutton. That is concerning, but they have depth at defensive end, and we'll get into this when we discuss Ohio State. Ohio State also has problems at offensive tackle that Penn State will be able to take advantage of.
Yeah, well, I did not see Dani during our window is like 10, 15 minutes. I did not see him on the field Wednesday night for what it's worth.
Yeah, and I, this is the type of injury that you probably like. I think they will make a decision about Drew and wait to know for sure until game time. I think with Dani, they probably won't know until he goes through warmups on Saturday with any degree of certainty, right? Like I think you can probably go into Saturday and be like 60 to 80% sure that Drew Allar is going to start at quarterback if all goes well this week. With Dennis-Sutton, I would expect that it's more of a how's he feeling Saturday at 11:59, right? And how's he feeling Saturday after a snap? 5 snaps, 10 snaps, if he goes, right? Like, I think this is the kind of thing that will maybe linger a little bit as long as, it is an issue.
From, again, up in the press box, I mean, he came out and he was kind of grabbing at his groin area and was kind of stretching that area just so if people aren't sure. But that was kind of what I took it as. Again, I am not a medical expert by any stretch. But yeah, I think that is one of those challenging injuries where you don't know, right? And I mean, Vanover very well could be an instrumental X factor this week, just because you don't know what you're going to have necessarily with Dani.
Yeah, but I think they're in a good spot with Vanover. I think, as James said, like Max Granville could go, which I think would be helpful. Smith Filbert has been good when he's played. Like they're going to miss Dennis-Sutton if he can't play. Again, we don't know that for sure. I think it's probably better to have that be a toss-up in your head until game time. But if he can't go, I don't think it's going to be as damaging as it could be for a player as good as Dennis-Sutton, just because they have such excellent depth there. I'm sure we'll see Abdul Carter moving around the defensive line too. But all in all, this defense against Wisconsin, I thought this was not a breakout game because we've seen this defense be really, really good. But to me, it felt like the kind of game where it's like, okay, listen, there's been some consternation about Tom Allen and the defense this year about its slow starts or whatever. I thought they were awesome from the jump. I thought they looked every bit of the dominant unit that you expected to see out of a Penn State defense in years past. They're third in SP Plus right now. Yes. That is on par with every level they've ever been at under James Franklin. By the way, Ohio State is first. I hate to be the bearer of bad news on that front. But I do
piling it on, John, don't you?
It's a very good defense. But I do think this defense can match up with any in the country, match up with any offense in the country on the field. And I don't know. I don't see a ton of flaws. The linebacker depth is still a concern, but I like in the starting group, to me, it's as good as it gets.
No pause for flaws. That could be another one too.
We're not doing that.
We're not doing that one. You know what? I think, and James Franklin mentioned it on Monday at the news conference, John, I'm going to quiz you here. Who are the 2 players he said they deserve more recognition on this defense?
One was Jalen Reed, which he has said frequently. despite Jalen Reed deserving or getting and earning a lot of praise. The other, I want to say it was a defensive lineman.
Devon J. Thomas.
Yes, Devon J. Thomas. Thank you.
I
knew it was a defensive tackle. Here's the thing. I didn't want to say that because in my head I was like, was it Alonzo Ford? Because Alonzo Ford has also flown under the radar.
And Zane Durant's had a good year. He's flown under the radar, which is probably good that we're mentioning several guys that have flown under the radar that we all could say hey, there's a case to be made for this guy, that guy.
I think that's a part of a really good defense that doesn't necessarily have the sack production maybe that you would anticipate or the turnover production, is that guys fly under the radar because they're not putting up massive numbers.
I go back to Reed's interception at Wisconsin, and you talk about a pivot point. You talk about a moment where you say, you know what? Everything's not looking so great. Their sideline to me looked pretty tight, right? It was Drew Allar's trying to, help guys on the side. Danny O'Brien's standing there with Beau Pribula. And I think you can definitely, in those venues, you can feel the energy shifting. You can feel that, okay, Wisconsin, they're leaving the door open. I was talking to our Wisconsin beat writer, Jesse Temple, at the halftime, and I'm like, Jesse, I don't. And he's like, yeah, I think Wisconsin's going to win this game. And I was like, I would not be surprised if they do. And so you have all that, right? But then you get a play like that. And for me, after that, the offense was kind of like, all right, let's let it rip. We're good. We're fine. Everybody settled down. And you could see the sideline come to life. You could see Drew Allar go over and run over to the defense and congratulate and celebrate with them. That is what special teams have. That is what special teams do, right? They make those moments, and you got to create opportunities for yourself. And you're playing with a backup quarterback. You're on the road. That place is getting loud. Oh, by the way, James Franklin told us Wednesday night they had headset communication issues in the fourth quarter, that the headset went out. I asked about that. I was curious, so I asked. And he said, yeah, he obviously was not happy that the headset went out, as he should not be happy with that. But they found ways to overcome it, right? Just like they did against USC. This is what good teams do. This is what playoff teams do, right? This is why Penn State, in my opinion, heads into this weekend in a house money situation. I did not expect at the beginning of the year we would be sitting here, here we are, Halloween, recording, happy Halloween, that we'd be recording this and I'd be saying, you know what? Sure, Penn State wants to win Saturday. A win would be huge Saturday, but they don't have to win Saturday, right? Because you are undefeated, because you have a favorable stretch. I don't want to dive too far ahead into the Ohio State preview yet, John. I can see you're ready to say, don't say it yet. But they've given themselves wiggle room, and so much of it is because of how this defense has stepped up in these adverse moments.
Yeah, I think you nailed it. And without further ado, let's get into that Ohio State preview with King of the North, Bill Landis. Let's take a brief break from the podcast to talk about our good friends over at Rhoback. Rhoback is a company that I have bought athletic apparel from for a while now. Hoodies, polos. I will be golfing this afternoon. I will be golfing in a Rhoback performance polo and Rhoback performance shorts. Just some of the most comfortable stuff that I wear, and can't say enough about it. And if you'd like to get stuff from Rhoback, you can head to rhoback.com and get 20% off your first order with code TND20. That's TND as in the Nittany Dispatch 20. And Audrey, I know you're a big fan of Rhoback too.
Yeah, John, can we just revisit that for a second, that you're wearing shorts here on Halloween? It is a scorcher in State College today. Perfect day to get outside, get active. I'm going to throw on a performance hoodie and go stroll the neighborhood. It's trick-or-treat night as well, so that's going to be a lot of fun. But yes, get your Rhoback apparel again. John, Halloween for some like myself is a reminder that Christmas is coming. Yes. Get ahead on your shopping. Do not wait.
Yes, and if you want 20% off that order, use that code TND20. Now, back to the show. And now with us to discuss the upcoming Ohio State game is Kings of the North, Bill Landis. Bill, how are we doing?
Doing very well. Looking forward to a game of some import this weekend. Happy to be here with you guys.
It is very important, but it feels a little less important than usual.
No, you're one of those guys.
Oh. Okay,
John,
listen.
It's the most important game because they took care of business against Bowling Green in Wisconsin. It's the most important game because it's the next one on the schedule. Thank you.
That's right. But big picture, it probably matters a little bit less than usual from a this season aspect. I would argue that it means more for Penn State long term because they can actually send Ohio State into some chaos with a win, which I think, listen, as a fan of chaos in general, I am here for that. Curious, Bill, from Ohio State's perspective, how important is this?
This is, Ryan Day said, this is a game that decides whether or not they're going to go to Indianapolis. There's another one on Ohio State's schedule because Ohio State still has to play Indiana and then it also has to beat Michigan. But
right,
that is their view on things since losing to Oregon, is that every game is sort of a Big Ten title elimination game. So yeah, it's a big deal. I don't think listen, no one in Ohio State's going to say that it's okay to lose, but I think that there was at least some thought going into the Oregon game that, you know, the season isn't over if Ohio State loses that game. Then I thought Ohio State played all right. They lost by a point on the road to now number one team in the country. It feels ratcheted up for this one. And part of what has made that a little more heightened, I think, is just not playing very well last week against Nebraska either. They came off of that loss to Oregon, had a week off to prepare, or an extra week off to prepare. They came out against Nebraska and played pretty flat and were trailing in the fourth quarter of that game before winning and shutting the door. So it gets mighty. It's already pretty uncomfortable here because there's a lot of Ryan Day can't win a big game chatter that is warranted based off his resume. If Ohio State loses this game, it's going to get not dicey in the sense that Ryan Day is like on the chopping block, but his fan base, I don't think, will be very much behind him if he loses this game.
See, Bill, my thought with this, because you said this and you teed me up for it, because my thinking going back to last Saturday night in Madison is that all the pressure's on Ohio State this week, that Penn State, they're undefeated, favorable schedule the rest of the way, that there is more heat on Ryan Day in this roster, right? Because you don't puff out your chest and say natty or bust. And here we are heading into November saying, ooh, you might not make it to Indianapolis, right? Like, am I correct in that, Bill, or am I crazy and off base with my thought there?
Well, it's interesting to me that you say that because maybe you have a better perspective.
Because I am
on
crazy.
It than I do.
No,
well,
okay.
no, because like I feel that way. I agree with you, but I am also in the Ohio State bubble where like that's all I hear about, right? So if you remove from that, kind of feel the same way, then I think that that's probably the way of it. James Franklin needs to show an ability to beat Ohio State at some point. But I think it'll soften the blow a little bit, I think, to get to what John was mentioning earlier, because Penn State is still very much alive for the playoff if it doesn't win this game. And Ohio State is alive for the playoff, too, if it doesn't win this game. But, yeah, you can't be natty or busting all offseason and then lose to Oregon, lose to Penn State, knock yourself off track to go to the Big Ten title game, and then have everyone questioning whether or not you can even win a playoff game if you're Ohio State.
I am curious. You said that, he's not going to be Ryan Day won't be on the hot seat if they lose this game. Does a third loss, because you mentioned Indiana and Michigan kind of looming too, does that create that conversation?
Yeah, probably. There's a new athletic director at Ohio State.
Right.
So I don't know. Like, he has to beat Michigan, obviously. You can't lose 4 in a row to Michigan. If it's another season where, so the 3 goals for Ohio State every year are beat Michigan, win the Big Ten, win the national championship. They have not done either of those 3 things in the last 3 seasons. If it's a 4th season of that, then yes, I think the uncomfortable conversations then start to not only happen within the fan base, but happen in the athletic administration building too.
Yeah. So you're telling me somebody has to win Saturday between these two?
Somebody does have to win. Somebody does have to win. Yeah.
Well, that's to me, the funny part about this, right? Like Ryan Day has become this coach who can't win big games. People have said that about James Franklin for a very long time. At the end of the day, someone will win on Saturday, and I'm willing to bet anyone who is saying those guys can't win the big game, they will not change their mind, because then it will be, oh, well, it's an Ohio State team that's 10-2 or 9-3. It's not a usual Ohio State team. Or it's, oh, of course, it's only Penn State. Ohio State always beats Penn State, right? Like, I don't think, unfortunately for either head coach, that anyone is going to get off their back based on Saturday's result. Well,
the thing for Ryan Day is that the he doesn't win a big game conversation doesn't include Penn State. Like,
right.
Like it's a Michigan conversation first and foremost. It is losing to Georgia in the semifinal a couple years ago. They're 1-1 against Clemson in postseason games. They got destroyed by Alabama in the national title game in 2020 when they were missing a bunch of guys due to contact tracing. and then obviously lost to Oregon this week. Like Penn State never gets lumped into that conversation. And part of it is because those were top 5 games, and this is usually just a top 10 game. Now it is a top 5 game. But I'm guilty of the same thing. Like I don't maybe it's unfair to Ryan Day that Penn State and Notre Dame, which Ohio State beat last year and the year before, are not included in the conversation when we're talking about whether or not Ryan Day can win a big game.
They're not even rent-free in his mind.
No, I think he wishes that it was rent-free in other people's minds, so we would give him more credit for doing it, but that's not the case.
I think that's a good lead into what this game will actually be on Saturday, right? Because we'll look at the Ohio State offense and the Penn State defense first, because I think that's probably the swing side of the ball, right? Ohio State with a quarterback in Will Howard that I have long not been a massive believer in. For those who listen to this podcast for a long time know, it felt pretty vindicated for some of those slots at the end of that Oregon game. An offensive line that is missing some key pieces. Where is this Ohio State offense at, and how do you expect it to handle a defense that is currently 3rd in SP+?
Yeah, the offensive line is the biggest question. Left tackle Josh Simmons was injured against Oregon. He's out for the season. He was replaced last week by Zen Mohalski against Nebraska. He did not play very well, and then he got hurt in the 4th quarter of that game. So now Ohio State is going to need another new starting left tackle. And my guess as we record this is that will be Donovan Jackson, who will move from left guard to left tackle. That's what they did during the game last week when Zen Mohalski got hurt. They moved Donovan Jackson from left guard to left tackle and then put in Luke Montgomery, he's a 2nd-year player. I can't remember if he's a technically
Ohio guy, right?
Yeah. Ohio guy from Findlay, Ohio. Was a fairly highly rated recruit, but I think probably is not, in my opinion, I don't think he's where he needs to be physically to start right now in the Big Ten. So I don't think that he'll start. I think what they might do is they've had 2 guys rotate a little bit at right guard, Integra Shabola and Austin Saraveld. And Saraveld actually started at left guard the first 2 games of the season when Donovan Jackson was injured. So I think Saraveld will probably play left guard and Jackson will play left tackle. And then the question is, great, you figured out who your 5 guys are. Can you block Abdul Carter?
Who you've been very high on.
So
you've been leading the Abdul Carter hype train all offseason.
Oh, I was, and then I parked the train. We did our Heisman Trophy picks before the season, and I had Abdul Carter 3rd on my preseason ballot.
Oh no!
I thought he was going to lead the country in sacks, and he's not. I think he's played really well from what I've watched, but he's not been the disruptive like Chase Young kind of game wrecker, I guess, that I thought he might be. So I'll own being wrong on that, but I still think he's excellent, and he definitely has Ohio State's full attention. And it could be as simple as like, well, they couldn't block him, and that's why Ohio State lost. I think with Chip Kelly, with the running backs that Ohio State has, the receivers are still awesome. It's like they lost Marvin Harrison Jr. and Jeremiah Smith might be better. So there are plenty of weapons to go around, and I have a hard time seeing Ohio State's offense being totally shut down. But if it's a tight game and Ohio State is like driving to try to win it late or something like that, maybe that's where you're most nervous about someone like Abdul Carter or Dennis-Sutton if he plays. You guys would know more about that than I do. Really getting after Will Howard in not the similar fashion that Oregon did at the end of that game.
We did not see Dani Wednesday night at practice, but again, we're there for like 10 minutes. So truly, it'll be a game time decision, I think. Go ahead, John.
Yeah, I was going to say, you mentioned Will Howard. What has your evaluation been of him? Because I think most people would say that at this point that I'm a biased source on the subject, given the scouting report I had on him prior to this season. But how do you feel like he's played for Ohio State?
I think he's been better at Ohio State than he was at Kansas State. Or more consistent, maybe. I think the problem with Will is like sometimes at Kansas State he'd look really good, and other times it's like, have you played quarterback before? And I think he's
not a good problem.
No. I think part of that is like the nature of the Kansas State offense. It's just like he didn't have a Mecca Ibuka and Jeremiah Smith to throw to, so that makes you look a little better, I think. But I think he's played well. He has been really good, like in their RPO game that they did not do a ton of against Nebraska, but have done a lot of for much of the year. His downfield passing definitely leaves a little something to be desired, but they've hit him a couple of big ones. They had 2 long touchdowns last week, one to Jeremiah Smith, one to Carnell Tate, in a game where they only scored 3 touchdowns. So those were big. So like it's like CJ Stroud's not walking in the Beaver Stadium on Saturday, and
you sure? Because a lot of people are going to be there. I mean, Jason Kelsey's.
I mean, he could be there. I think like Will Howard has given them, I would say, like something more than Kyle McCord gave Ohio State last year. And a lot of that conversation is mobility. And Will can run, although he's not done it a ton. He has scrambled a little better than I thought he would. I think he's pretty smart. He plays with a little bit of juice too, which I think they've been missing at the quarterback position. Like even CJ Stroud was awesome. Obviously, he's awesome in the NFL. He's not like a rah-rah kind of guy who's going to like have some like histrionics to him when he's out there on the field. And like Will does that a little bit, which I actually think helps the offense. So I would say he's been better than I thought he would be. But he is probably, I think, fairly, for anyone who thinks this way, not quite as good as you'd expect an Ohio State quarterback under Ryan Day to be.
Am I wrong, Bill, in saying that if Drew Allar plays and if he's effective and able to be mobile enough, Penn State, for once, has the better of the two quarterbacks in this game?
I see. So I don't think if Drew Allar plays, like you're not going to get 100% Drew Allar, right? So
if Drew Allar's at 90%,
yeah, I think I take Will Howard.
Interesting.
Ooh.
Okay.
Yeah, I think I take. I don't know. I need to, Drew. Again,
I can send you some videos of Drew jogging if it helps.
I was watching him. I was watching him on Wednesday night. I like that. Does he normally wear sweatpants, or he's just wearing that to cover up his legs?
He does on occasion. He does on occasion.
Yeah, but it was also like 75 degrees yesterday,
right?
Which is why that's where they got me. I was like,
yeah. I guess I would say maybe that's a coin flip conversation. Where in the past it has been a very obvious, maybe with the exception of last year because Kyle McCord wasn't playing very well, but it's usually been a pretty obvious, like, yeah, Ohio State has the best quarterback coming into this game. And I don't think it's obvious, but I think I would take a healthy Will Howard over a even 90% Drew Allar.
I think
that's an interesting take. I did want to mention, Bill, because I can't miss the opportunity to shout out my hometown with Will Howard.
Yeah.
Drew Shelton, Penn State's left tackle, was Will Howard's tackle, was also Will Howard's tight end before that. So I asked Drew this week about, what was it like sharing a huddle with Will all those years ago? And he said, he hit on the leadership piece. And he said, like, this is a guy who's going to get everybody right. And, I think my thought process on them coming out is I think if Ohio State comes out, punches Penn State quickly, I then think you have a little bit of breathing room because I buy into my own house money theories. And I believe that if you come out and you jump on Penn State early, you give yourself just a little bit of breathing room.
Did you guys catch what Will said after the Nebraska game?
Yes. I had so many people send that to me so quickly.
I mean, so Micah Bowens would have been Penn State's quarterback that year, if I'm recalling correctly, the quarterback commit, right?
There's a name.
I'm going deep pulls here. And like, it has to be a two-way street, right? Am I Bill, did you take any issue with what was said?
Oh, Ohio State didn't recruit him either. That was the other thing. Like,
that's what I'm saying.
No, I didn't. I didn't have any issue with what he said. But I think that he said it and the way he said it speaks to a little bit of what I was saying earlier about kind of the energy that Will has.
The moxie.
Yeah, moxie, if you want to call it that. Yeah. I am curious how he might how that might actually manifest itself on Saturday. Like the end of the Oregon game, I don't even think was bad. It was just like if he slid a half second earlier, Ohio State could have won that game, and everyone's talking about the play that Will Howard made to get them in field goal range. I thought he was really good for 99% of that game. And it was the biggest game he's ever played in. And so like that was encouraging to me. And I do think he's been a good leader for this offense. And I think the players believe in him. But if he's coming into this game with clearly a chip on his shoulder, I could also see him being like a little too amped up, right? He's going to have family members in the stands. I think his sister goes to Penn State. Or someone, I think.
You tell us. This could have been a story this week. I got to leave, John. I'm going over to campus to find some.
Yeah, I'm sure you are.
So like my read on it is that all of these like sort of outside influences are going to lead to Will playing well, but it could certainly, the coin can flip and it can be the other way around. And like Will Howard shows up trying to be Superman and then puts himself in a bad spot. So I'm excited excited actually to see how that plays out.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of the thing with Howard. You mentioned about the Kansas State, like sometimes you're like, is this your first time, junior? Like this is, you know what I mean? Like that is what I see too often. I think the Oregon end is kind of a part of that, right? Like you're right. If he's a half second sooner, everyone's talking about how great of a play it is. Unfortunately, it wasn't, right? Like, and there's that he kind of just lost it in that one moment. And there are times when he's, I think, significantly better than most quarterbacks. And there are times where, like you said, that it just looks not clueless, but like just like he's just making decisions out there on the fly that he knows he shouldn't be making. I do think that side of the ball is the what flips the game. And that's partially because I think the other side of the ball is going to be a like big time grinded out, like nobody's enjoying this, please make it stop kind of battle between Ohio State's defense and Penn State's offense. What is it that makes this Ohio State defense the number one defense in the country, according to SB Plus?
So it's interesting because I don't like no one here is feeling that right now.
Right, I know, and I've noticed that in all the reading I've done.
John, you're over here spewing things again.
The issue again is that like those big games, right? And there's a pretty damning stat for Jim Knowles. So he's been here since 2022. That's 2 games against Michigan. That's a game against Georgia in the semifinals, and then the game earlier this year against Oregon. They have not forced a stop in the fourth quarter of any of those games. So if this game, if this game gets to the fourth quarter, either with Penn State leading or in striking distance, or if it's just it's still in the balance there, Jim Knowles is going to have to show something. He's going to have to show an ability to do something, frankly, he has not done. Like they did it last week against Nebraska, and Ryan Day was like really talking about how impressed he was that they got stops in the fourth quarter against Nebraska, which is like, it's great to build that confidence. It's not the same thing. This will be a very different test, and all those other games I mentioned were different tests than that. So like what makes the defense good is like the defensive line is good. The defensive line plays the run well. Caleb Downs is excellent. I think Caleb Downs is the best safety in the country. And he's really good in run support. He's like having an extra linebacker out there at times. The linebackers, especially Sonny Styles, I think have been better of late. And Sonny's really grown into his role as he plays will linebacker sometimes, other times he'll play Sam if they play 3 linebackers on the field. JT Tuimoloau and Jack Sawyer don't have the pass rushing production that people hope they would, but they both play the run well as defensive ends. So it's just like a pretty stout defense that for the most part does a really good job of keeping things in front of them and then tackling well so that, a 12-yard run doesn't turn into a 40-yard run. They do limit explosive plays quite well, with the exception of the couple of plays against Oregon where their receivers got behind Ohio State's cornerbacks. But no offense to Penn State's receivers, I don't know that I see that happening in this game. So you guys can correct me on that if you feel differently. I don't think they're quite up to the task as Oregon's receivers were.
Bill, I am surprised we've made it 18 and a half minutes into this without me saying it, without you bringing it up. You mentioned the receivers. I can say it. What's the stat line? What stat line are you predicting for Julian Fleming on Saturday?
Before answering that question, I need to know whether or not Penn State's going to have the ball in the fourth quarter with a chance to drive for the win, because if they do, then I'm going to add 4 more catches to Julian Fleming's stat line on the final drive.
Well, I don't want to tip my pick just yet. I would not say that they're going to have that opportunity. So.
Yeah, I don't know. Like Julian was always a complimentary piece at Ohio State, and I think people at Penn State are maybe seeing why that was the case. And I'm not trying to dog the guy. He's been through a lot of injuries and played through a lot of stuff, and he's a really tough football player who does a lot of like dirty work too, right? It's not all about just catching the ball.
Yes.
So he's a really good blocker, and he's pretty selfless.
Great quote too. Enjoy talking.
Yeah. He's got great perspective. I always enjoy talking to him. He's just not like super dynamic as a pass catcher. So I don't know. Maybe they'll force him the ball because it'd be a nice story if he has a good game against Ohio State, but I don't know that I'm anticipating anything more than a couple of catches for him. I
bet in the early goings of the game, he has at least one like designed target, right? Whether it's a screen of some sort, like they're definitely going to draw something up for him that time.
I don't know if you caught it, John, at practice Wednesday night. We're there and they threw him a pass right away and it just went right through his hands. And it was kind of like what happened at Wisconsin last week. And then
that one, but Drew James was like that one little. He was like,
Julian, get back here. We're doing it again. And then, lined up, ran it again, caught it. But yeah, no, I think he's been his role here. has been as much of the leadership setting the tone in the meeting room. Like we were talking to Trey Wallace Wednesday night after practice, and he said, like, yeah, he's like, Julian's like value here has been on the field, but it's also been showing us what to do and how to prepare and kind of all those things throughout the week, which Penn State just did not have that guy in the room previously in terms of that leadership thing. So again, just one of many wrinkles to Saturday, but I had to ask you, Bill, because you've been my go-to Julian Fleming question asker for all these years. I would be very curious if I was Jim Knowles, how much time or how do you prepare for a Penn State offense which has done everything under Andy Kotelnicki, right? Like my scorching hot take is that someone who wears the number 44 is going to break this game open, right? It's either Tyler Warren or JT. I can't say his last name.
Let's do it. No, you're doing it.
Tuimoloau.
Close. You said it better than James Franklin did on Tuesday.
Yeah, well,
or Monday, whatever that was.
Monday, I haven't practiced, but JTT, I think they call him sometimes. But so that's my hot take that a 44 is going to break this game open. But I mean, the Penn State offense, they've done so many things with Andy Kotelnicki and the way in which they've gotten Tyler Warren the ball, right? Mm-hmm. How do you not chase ghosts when no one knows what this guy's going to do, right? And like, just when you think you've seen enough of Andy Kotelnicki, it's like, oh yeah, the guy comes out and pulls something else, and you're like, what is he doing? I mean, it's just been absolutely crazy.
So Jim Knowles has faced Andy Kotelnicki once before in 2021, which was Jim's last year at Oklahoma State. That was not a good Kansas team, and I think the backup QB had to play for Kansas in that game, so that was a blowout for Oklahoma State. But I only mention that to say that maybe Jim Knowles won't be like flabbergasted by some of the stuff that Andy Kotelnicki might do because he's seen some of it before, but I'm sure that there's something that Penn State hasn't shown yet that'll unveil this week as well. If it, every week I feel like I put on a Penn State game. I'm like, what? Why are you doing that? But it's fun to watch, and I imagine it's really difficult to prepare for. So I think you kind of can't get too caught up in it. And I think maybe you just focus more on the matchups and less about all the formational junk that Andy Kotelnicki will throw out there. And I think as it pertains to Tyler Warren, who feels like sort of the ultimate chess piece within all of that, Ohio State has Caleb Downs, who, as I mentioned, I do think they could throw at him a couple of times. And Sonny Styles is as a true freshman. Sonny, who had enrolled early, so he was 17, I think, at the time. Ohio State was playing Georgia in the Peach Bowl, and Georgia at that time had Brock Bowers and Darnell Washington. And Darnell Washington was like, what do you do with this guy? How do you cover him? Ohio State's answer to that was Sonny Styles. And they put a true freshman out there to just go wherever Darnell Washington went. And Darnell Washington ended up getting hurt in that game pretty early, so he only played like a dozen snaps or so. But I thought that was instructive. Now, a couple of years later, I could very much see Jim Knowles taking a similar approach to Tyler Warren. So if number 6 on Ohio State is following Tyler Warren everywhere he goes, like, I don't be surprised by that, because I think that could be what they choose to do.
I was going to have a rebuttal for your Jim Knowles struggles in the fourth quarter, because the 2022 game, Ohio State has the big comeback. Then I remember Penn State also scored 17 points in that fourth quarter.
It was 16-14. It was 16-14 going into the fourth quarter. What was the final score? 41-34?
44-31. Yeah, because I remember going down onto the field, like we can go down onto the field late in the game, at Beaver Stadium, and I remember there were like 8 minutes left when I was like gathering my stuff to go down, and it was not that bad. And then I got down on the field and I was like, what did I just miss? Like, what all unfolded? I was walking down here for 2 minutes of real life time, and there were like 3 touchdowns on the board.
One of the wild game.
Yeah, one of the crazier games that I can remember. But if they are going to have that success in the fourth quarter, what has to change? Like, is there something that you're seeing that is fundamentally changing with the Jim Knowles defense that happens in the fourth quarter? Or is it the usual things that happen with coaches, right? Where they suddenly, like, the tension gets to them and they just start calling the game in such a conservative way that they're allowing these things to happen rather than kind of dictating.
Yeah, I think the last thing you said there is a good way to put it. I think most of it comes back to Ohio State affecting quarterbacks. Like, for as good as the defensive line is, and it has a bit of a reputation outside of Columbus that is, I think, pretty different from Ohio State's fan base. That defensive line, like, they're good, but they don't they don't really like take over a game, at least from a passing perspective. And I think what's happened in a lot of these games is that the quarterbacks are comfortable, especially against Oregon. Like if you look at the pressure rate against Oregon, it was pretty high, but if you watch the game, it didn't feel that way. They didn't sack Dillon Gabriel. So that was a huge talking point coming off of that game because it wasn't the first time that it happened. And Ryan Day talked a lot about, like, we got to get more pressure. We got to be more creative. When we do that, we have to put guys in better positions to be successful. And then they came out against Nebraska and they were running more stunts and twists and all that stuff when they were rushing 4. They definitely blitzed more against Nebraska. And it wasn't all good, but they did have 3 sacks, and all 3 sacks came on blitzes. So I think that's something that Jim Knowles, who was very aggressive at Oklahoma State, and then got burned by that aggression when he came to Ohio State and has dialed it back since then. He's still trying to find the right balance there, but I do think they are going to try to find ways to generate more pressure and actually hit quarterbacks late in these games, because that's the thing where they've really come up short, is just like whoever it is, JJ McCarthy, Stetson Bennett, Dillon Gabriel, like they are unbothered when they're making game-winning plays, and that obviously can't be the case if you're Ohio State's defense.
And I was going to say, too, with regard to the defensive line, there's been the weird scuttlebutt out there about Ohio State and Jim Knowles and Larry Johnson, everything there. Mm-hmm. Does this feel like an imperfect match to you, and that's part of the reason for the lack of pass? Like, are they trying to do either too many things or they're not aligned? Like, what is the root cause from a coaching perspective that's kind of getting in the way of?
Yeah, Bill, put on that coaching hat.
Well, no, because they do have a ton of talent there, right?
Get the whistle, Bill. Yeah.
No, it's it's a huge conversation here. So Jim Knowles prior to Ohio State was more of a, I don't even want to say he was a 3-down guy, but he was a guy who would change up his fronts a lot. He and he would do it without substituting. He had this float position that he called the Leo, that was like a half linebacker, half defensive lineman. They used a couple different guys in that role, and he would just move that guy all over the place. Where like down to down, you didn't know if they were going to be in 3-down or like in a 3-3 stack or in a 4-down kind of thing. And they just don't do that at Ohio State. They toyed with it when Jim first got here, with Jack Sawyer being the guy that moved around, and it didn't work all that much. And Larry Johnson has been doing this forever. He's recruited to a 4-down defense the whole time he's been here. That's all he's coached. That's what he's comfortable with. And I do think there has been a little bit of back and forth between those two on how exactly Ohio State should be deploying its front. And I do think it has limited some of what Jim Knowles would like to do defensively. If you pick any game from 2021 Oklahoma State, watch 2 drives of the defense, and then turn on an Ohio State game from this year. It does not look like the same defense. Ohio State's defense is still good because it has really good players, but from a schematic standpoint, and what's funny about it is like the reasons why Jim Knowles got the job at Ohio State, he's just not done a whole lot of that, because I do think he's handcuffed a little bit, but it's also because he allows it to happen, right? He defers defensive line decisions to the position coach, which is not unheard of in college football, but in turn, like, he's not able to run. Mm-hmm. Yeah, he's not able to run, I think, a lot of the stuff he would prefer to run. He's had to tweak his system quite a bit to serve a more of a straight 4-down defense.
Yeah, and I think that's really interesting because the dynamic there, right? Like, Larry Johnson's been doing this for a very long time, and I think I think you're right in saying he's deferring to him, but I'm also, and I know you know this, like, somebody who's been doing it for a while wants control, right? Like, and is trying to like implement what they've always done. And I think that is kind of the matchup that will dictate this game. I did not tell you we were going to ask you for a prediction on the pod, but we're here now. And I don't know if you've gone on the record yet. Do you have a prediction for Saturday's game?
I do. I'm picking Ohio State 24-20. So like about a field goal game.
Oh, no. This happens all the time, Bill. Usually Audrey or I will say our prediction. We have it written down beforehand. We do not discuess it at all. Here, and then someone rolls their eyes and gets frustrated because they stole the other person's prediction almost to the exact score.
It's fine. You're the guest, Bill. Keep going.
Okay. So I apologize. I think it, I don't even know what the total is, actually. I haven't looked at it.
45.5, I believe, which makes that very funny.
I didn't look at it either.
So like, low scoring defensive kind of struggle. My lean for Ohio State is partly James Franklin. Like, I have to be honest about that. I understand it's not the most sophisticated way to pick a game, but a trend is a trend. And I don't know whether it's Drew Allar playing injured or Beau Pribula. I think Ohio State has the quarterback advantage in this game. And while I have questions about Ohio State's defense in big games, especially about the defensive line, it always seems to show up against Penn State. So I think that group will get the job done too, and maybe rein in Penn State's offense a little bit. But I think it's going to be a real fight for 4 quarters, just a low scoring one that Ohio State wins.
And one other thing Audrey and I usually do here, if Ohio State wins, who is the player that we're talking about Sunday as the reason why that happened?
Jeremiah Smith.
I like it.
Not even a
Listen,
hesitation.
yeah, I mean, I wouldn't either if I watched Jeremiah Smith play every Saturday. Like, that seems like a fun time.
Marvin Harrison Jr., the last 2 years against Penn State, 21 catches for 344 yards or something like that. Jeremiah Smith is perfectly capable of a game like that. And it's not even him scoring a bunch of touchdowns. It's just like, oh, it's 3rd and 9. What did Ohio State do? They threw a slant to Jeremiah Smith. And that's because that's what Marvin did 2 years ago.
And you mentioned those numbers for Marvin. That was not counting all of the times he was wide open last year or just never saw him.
Yeah, right.
It could have been 400 yards if they really wanted it to be. But I think that's a good place to leave this discussion. We really appreciate you coming on, Bill.
Bill Landis, an absolute king for joining us on here.
Kings of the North, Bill Landis. Where else can we find you, Bill, while we're here?
Kings of the North on YouTube is where we do more of like a regional college football thing. So we talk a lot about Penn State. So find us there. And then the Ohio State stuff is the podcast because we're super original with our names. You can find that on YouTube as well. Yeah.
All right. Thanks, Bill.
Thanks, Bill. Appreciate you.
Thank you. Thanks
again to Bill for coming on to talk about the Penn State-Ohio State game this Saturday. But now it is time for us to get into our predictions. Audrey, I will defer to you first.
Well, if anyone watching on YouTube, they saw my response when Bill said his prediction, because I wrote mine down. I actually had to make it a couple days ago on The Athletic. I got Ohio State 24, Penn State 20, and my reasoning, I'll admit, is really not that great. My reasoning is that last year I picked Penn State to win this game, and obviously they did not. And after that, I said, I am not picking Penn State to beat Ohio State again until they actually do. So I am in that kind of that prove it mode, but I do think, there is a very realistic path that Penn State wins this game. My confidence level in picking Ohio State is not that great. Like, I would say it's probably like a 30% of I feel good about what I just picked. But mainly because, John, I'm not a flip-flopper here. And I said I wasn't going to pick them until they won. So that's where I'm at. Ohio State 24, Penn State 20. The player that we'll be talking about Sunday, Caleb Downs. I am predicting a pick of a quarterback from Penn State. I'll say Drew Allar. I think Allar still is going to play a pretty solid game, but I think we're going to look back and say, hey, here's a pivotal moment in this that kind of turns it. What do you got?
Yeah, I have Penn State winning, as I said in the preseason that I thought Penn State would win this game. I'm going to stick to that, although I very easily could pick Ohio State and just say I was right no matter what.
Which also means, John,
I'm not going to pick Purdue.
Really
I'm not going to pick Purdue.
Purdue. Yeah.
I'm not picking Purdue. Or am I? You'll have to tune in that week to find out. I'm not. I'm absolutely not. But I'm picking Penn State to win this game 21-20. I honestly don't have a great feel for how this is going to go, right? Like, it feels like everyone involved in this matchup is really tense right now on both sides, right? Like, you can tell from talking to Bill that things are tense in Columbus. We know things are tense here with the kind of gravity of this matchup. I have us talking about Nick Singleton on Sunday or Saturday evening about this game, just because I think he is going to be in a position to break some big plays, and that's going to really matter, right? Like, I think the explosive play battle is the one that we're going to point to as to why Penn State won this game. And I don't even know that they're necessarily going to win it. I think they're going to get enough touchdowns out of explosive plays that it makes all the difference. And a 21-20 win, like I said, I've got Singleton running for over 100 yards in this game. Either way, I couldn't tell you the last time. Yeah, I had as poor a feel for an outcome just because of kind of the tension on both sides. It feels less about the X's and O's and more about like just who's going to come out calmly and play like they can play.
And I think it's like after last week with Ohio State, like I can see it where you say, oh, okay, after how they looked against Nebraska, like, oh, this guy's Penn State could run away with it. And then I could also see, hey, this is a really like ticked off Ohio State team. Oh yeah, this is the team we thought it was with Kashawn Judkins and all those guys, which Penn State is well aware of. I did want to touch on this, John, because it came up this week and I didn't mention it yet. And I think it's really good perspective heading into this weekend. Devontae Thomas was asked Wednesday night after practice by Tyler Donkoh, friend of the show from Lions 247. He was asked about, there have been some emotional moments in this Penn State Ohio State matchup over the years of guys that haven't gotten the job done, right? Teams that haven't won here. Like, do you feel any of that pressure? And Devon said, absolutely. He said, this game is about the PJ Mustafers, the Jair Browns, the Sean Cliffords, right? This is a 6th-year guy in Devontae Thomas who's never beaten Ohio State, right? You got to go back all the way to 2016. I always think back to watching Pat Fryermuth walk off the field with a towel draped over his head at the Horseshoe, right? I think about Trace McSorley after 4th and 5 and that big moment. I think about, fans in Columbus storming the field, but also wanting to get a photo with Saquon Barkley because of how he performed that day, right? Like, there's so many of these emotional moments. And Devon said, yeah, if we win Saturday, I hope Penn State fans storm the field. Penn State has not stormed the field since 2016 when they beat Ohio State. This I just wanted to mention that because I think it really sets the stage for this weekend. It's going to be fun. This town is going to be jam-packed. We're recording this Thursday, and I need to get to the grocery store today because Friday is going to be an absolute madhouse. It's going to be a lot of fun. We will be there. We will be recording after the game as well, now that we're back to our regular rotation with functioning microphones. So please, if you enjoy the show, tell a friend. Don't forget to rate, review, subscribe. Wherever you're watching on Saturday, we hope you enjoy it. It's going to be fun. Anything else, John? Take us away.
No, I think that covers a lot of it. Like Audrey said, don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast. Those 5-star ratings on Apple Podcasts really help us out. Hit the thumbs up button down below. If you're watching on YouTube, hit the subscribe button. That helps us as well as we, once again, continue the march to 2,000 subscribers on YouTube. You can find Audrey on Twitter at OddSnyder4. You can find me on Twitter at John Sauber. You can find Audrey's writing at The Athletic and mine at centerdaily.com. Until next time, thank you for tuning in. Have a great day.